As you first look at the drag and drop module, the first thing that you'll probably notice is that this is an immediately invoked function expression. So with this syntax here, by wrapping the function with parentheses, and coming down to the bottom, here's the close parentheses, and then open close, which immediately runs this code. All of the setup for this module happens immediately, and each one of the resulting functions are available through the drag drop variable. Now, as this runs, the first thing that it will do is attempt to find all the targets on the page. And it'll find that by looking for any element that has the data-d&d role attribute equal to drop zone. The draggables are found the same way, looking for data-d&d roles equal to draggable. Then I also have a couple variables here for the target class name and the source class name. So this would be equal to the over class and the drop class, which you've seen in some of the previous demos. Now, in order to compensate for Internet Explorer, I'm creating a flag here to be able to report back whether or not drag and drop types are supported. This will make it really easy to detect this feature without having to do a lot of extra try-catch blocks. So the first function here is D&D type supported, just returns the value of what's basically this private variable. Then of course we have the cancel function. This is exactly the same as what you've seen in the other demos, just canceling the default behavior. Now let's take a look at drag start. Now remember, this is the event that fires on the source as it begins dragging. So the first thing that I need to do is get reference to the element using a jQuery selector. And then from there, I'm able to find out whether or not there's an attribute for data-d&d effect allowed. So if that's defined in the markup, it will return whatever effect is allowed. Otherwise, it will return undefined. So if the effect allowed is not undefined, then I simply set it equal to the property on the data transfer object. Then if there's a CSS class to apply to this draggable item, I add that in as well. And lastly, this code block down here helps to even out some of the browser inconsistencies. If you remember, Firefox requires that you call setData even if you're not using anything. So other code executing later on can add other data into the text plain type. But right now, in case nothing else is being set into it, this just adds in that empty string. And this line just gives us an opportunity to find out whether Internet Explorer is in play here and if none of the types are supported. So I'll use that variable later on when I need to know what type of data transfer type I can use. Next, let's look at drag end. So you saw this same functionality before. This is just done in a little more safe manner. If the source CSS class name is defined, then it'll find all the elements that have that source class name applied to it and remove them. So remember, drag end fires after the drop operation is done, or really at the end of the drag and drop pipeline. So this just cleans up the UI in case any of these classes are applied to elements that they shouldn't be at this point. And the same thing is done for the target class name. Any elements that have that class applied to it, it simply removes it. For dropped, most of the functionality ends up going into dropped, but this is just a basic stub. Here, for dropped, what's most important is that the drop target class name is removed from that element when the drag source is being dropped onto the target. Drag over is set up to apply the drop effect that was assigned in the markup. Here it pulls the effect that's defined on the drop target in markup, and if there's a value for it, it sets it to the drop effect on data transfer. Also, if there's a CSS class that needs to be applied to this drop target, it adds that in there as well. For drag leave, it just removes the CSS class for the drop target as the draggable item is leaving its boundaries. And lastly, there's a function here for setting the CSS class names. So this allows the class names to be passed into the module for the target class name and the source class name. And finally, just as we've done in any of the other samples, we need to take the targets and add event handlers for each one of the events that are necessary. Drop, drag enter, which just needs to be canceled at this point, drag over, and drag leave. And for each one of the draggable items, what I'm doing here is adding the property for draggable equals true programmatically, and then adding event handlers for drag start and drag end. Finally, this is using the revealing module pattern. So what I'm exposing here are the functions for set CSS class name and is drag and drop type supported. So now with this module implemented, we can use it back on the page. So you notice that the drag and drop module is being included into the page through this script tag. And then in the jQuery ready function, the drag and drop variable is available, and I can call the function for set class names. And again, the first one is the target, and the second one is for the drag source. Now I create a function expression that can run when the dropped event fires, and then I can just go in and update the count of how many times an element's been dropped into the drop target. Then I can access the drop zones, and for each one of those items, add in a new event listener for the drop event and run this dropped function. So like I said, the drag and drop module really abstracts out a lot of the complexities for all the boilerplate code that's needed to handle events, cancel default behavior, set class names, and remove class names.